Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something I think you'll find pretty relevant, respiratory vaccines. You know those annoying viruses, colds, flu, even COVID?
hmm
They just keep coming back around, right?
Right. And we're looking at a research paper here called Rethinking Next Generation Vaccines for Coronaviruses, Influenza Viruses, and Other Respiratory Viruses.
Quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, why haven't we figured out these respiratory vaccines yet? Why is it so hard for our bodies to develop long-lasting immunity? You'd think we'd learn after the first few colds.
You'd think so. And this is where the concept of disease tolerance comes in. It seems our respiratory systems have actually evolved to tolerate these threats to some extent.
So we're okay with a little bit of a viral free-for-all going on in there.
In a way, yes. It's all about balance, you see. If our immune systems went crazy every time we got a sniffle, we'd be constantly inflamed. Not a fun time.
I can imagine. So this tolerance helps us conserve energy and focus on the really bad stuff.
Hmm.
But how does this make developing vaccines harder?
Well, think of it this way. If our system is already kind of used to these viruses, it's harder for a vaccine to come in and be like, hey, this is serious, make a big fuss. It's like trying to teach an old dog a new trick when they're perfectly content napping.
A bit of a catch-22 then. Our own defenses making us tough to vaccinate.
Exactly. And it's pretty fascinating when you compare us to, say, bats.
Bats. Okay, always up for a good bat story. What do they have to do with this?
Bats are infamous for carrying viruses. And one reason is they can tolerate viral loads that would make other mammals incredibly sick. During hibernation, their immune systems basically go into power-saving mode, allowing them to coexist with viruses without triggering massive inflammation.
Wow. Incredible, but also a little creepy when you think about it. So
Hmm.
are they like the ultimate example of this disease tolerance?
In a lot of ways, yes. They've taken this evolutionary strategy to the extreme.
It's amazing. But if our bodies are designed for this tolerance, can we really overcome it with vaccines?
That's the million-dollar question, and to understand that, it's important we talk about having the right defenses in the right place.
So before we were talking about bats and how they've really got this disease tolerance thing down pat, but where does that leave us humans when it comes to making better respiratory vaccines?
Well, it shows just how important it is to have the right defenses in the right spot. It's not just about triggering any immune response.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
You see, our bodies make different kinds of antibodies, each with their own specialty. And when it comes to our respiratory system, you know that moist lining in our nose, throat, lungs? The real hero there is something called secretory IgA, or SIGI for short.
Sigi. Sounds kind of like a secret weapon.
You could say that it's the main antibody in those linings and acts as the first line of defense against viruses trying to get in.
Like a security checkpoint, making sure only the right stuff gets through.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The antibodies we usually measure in our blood, the ones that tell us if a vaccine worked,
Yeah.
they aren't always that useful in the mucosal lining.
Hold on. So even if we have antibodies in our blood, they might not be the right type to fight off a virus in our nose or throat.
That's right. Like having a fire crew all ready to go, but the fire's at a building with no hydrant nearby. Ready to fight, but not the right tools for the job, you see.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure we've got enough of this SIGA on the front lines then?
That's what researchers are working on now. And it's especially important for viruses like the flu, RSV, even COVID potentially. Those guys can be sneaky.
Sneaky. What do you mean?
Well, if they get past those initial defenses in the upper respiratory tract, they can travel down to the lower respiratory tract, our lungs, and that's when things get more serious.
Right, that's when we're talking pneumonia and all sorts of complications.
Exactly. So understanding these different areas and how their immune responses differ, that's key for making better vaccines. It's not just about a stuffy nose anymore. It's about stopping these viruses from getting a foothold where they can really do damage.
Like a game of chess almost.
Yeah.
Got to anticipate the virus's moves and have our defenses ready at each step.
Great analogy. And that's why the research you found is so interesting. Scientists are looking at all sorts of ways to outsmart these viruses.
Okay, so let's talk solutions. What are some of the promising avenues researchers are exploring to overcome these challenges? I'm sure our listener is eager to hear about the latest breakthroughs. So we've talked about the challenges, but now for the really interesting stuff, the solutions. What are scientists doing to develop respiratory vaccines that can actually outsmart these viruses?
Well, there are several approaches. One key area is improving the types of vaccines we already have, making them better at triggering those mucosal immune responses we talked about.
Right, like upgrading our existing tools. What does that look like practically?
Okay, so think about the different types of vaccines. Some, like many flu vaccines, use inactivated viruses. Others, like the MMR vaccine, use a weakened version of the live virus. Those are called live attenuated vaccines.
I've heard of those. What's the advantage there?
Live attenuated vaccines tend to create a stronger, longer lasting immune response. They're more like a real infection. But there are downsides too. They can be risky for people with weaker immune systems, for example.
So it's about finding that balance, effectiveness versus safety.
Exactly, and that's where a lot of research is focused, making those non-replicating vaccines, the ones without the live virus, just as effective as the live ones, but without the risks.
Makes sense. We've talked a lot about where these vaccines need to work in that mucosal lining, but what about the what? What are they targeting exactly?
This is about the vaccine antigen. It's like a wanted poster for our immune system. The antigen teaches our bodies what to look for and attack.
So we're picking out the most recognizable features for our immune system to zero in on.
Precisely. However, viruses are tricky. They change constantly, evolving, which makes it harder for our immune system to recognize them. That's why researchers are working on vaccines that target parts of the virus less likely to mutate. Some even target multiple parts simultaneously. It's like having a wanted poster with different angles of the suspect, increasing the chances of identification.
That's clever. So we've got the type of vaccine, the target, and we know location is key. Anything else on the horizon?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Remember how we talked about our immune systems being okay with a certain level of threat? Well, scientists are finding ways to use that. They're training our innate immune systems to be more alert without going into overdrive.
Like giving our immune system a good workout to make it stronger and more responsive.
Exactly. This trained innate immunity focuses on boosting those rapid, non-specific defenses, the first line of defense.
This is also promising. I'm really feeling optimistic about the future of these vaccines.
Right. As you should be. There's a lot of amazing research happening. One last thought for you. We've talked about how our immune systems naturally deal with these recurring viruses. It makes you wonder, should we rethink how often we vaccinate? Instead of just once a year, could more frequent targeted vaccines be the answer? That's a question researchers are tackling right now.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. It really challenges the way we think about vaccines. As always, you've given us a lot to think about. A huge thank you to our expert for breaking all this down. And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into respiratory vaccines. It's clear you're just as curious about this as we are. Until next time, stay curious.